So this is an extraordinarily personal talk. It's one that I first gave at Perf Matters, where Tim and I met in person, and I realized that Tim and I are the most hilarious duo, because he's quite a bit taller than me. I don't know if you've noticed that. But to give a personal talk like this, many of you probably have no idea who I am. And so to tell you a little bit about myself, to contextualize why this talk is important to me, hopefully that will help to make it important to you. So I want to tell you about myself through the context of the careers that I've tried to hold. But I still am kind of trying, I guess. When I studied in high school, I wanted to be a journalist, specifically a foreign correspondent like Christiane Amanpour. And I wanted to travel the world and do reporting. And so I immersed myself in newspaper staff and went to journalism camp, which is so nerdy to admit. And I really deep dove into newspaper staff and wrote a lot of pieces. I thought journalism was such a cool industry to be in, because it's one where you can write a story about the manhole covers in the street, or you could write a story about Watergate. And it has such immense power. Part of that power that is also used is that journalists can also write a story that can villainize a 12-year-old black boy who's murdered. And that same journalist can turn around and write a story in Rolling Stone that humanizes a white supremacist boy. So I thought that there was a lot of power in this career, and I, like many of our favorite politicians, am very power hungry, I guess. But journalism didn't really pan out for me. I graduated into what is now known as the 2008 American Recession. So journalism wasn't a very good career option at that point. And a little website, you may have heard of it, called twitter.com was launched relatively close to when I graduated, and many people saw that as the potential death of print journalism, that this idea of microblogging news would become the most prolific thing, and in many ways it has, but I do still see the occasional newspaper here and there. So when I graduated, without really any job prospects, I had to rely on a skill that I learned from a very young age. At 10, I went to school with my dad, basically. My parents owned a pre-press business, which many of you don't know what that is, probably, but pre-press is a step where large format photographs were taken of print designs and then printed onto big metal plates, and those metal plates were then given to the printing press. And that's something that my parents specialized in, and that's what their business held, but desktop publishing tools became prolific very quickly around when I was 10. And so tools like PageMaker, QuarkXPress, which now modern predecessors are things like Adobe InDesign, those tools took over that step and made it seamless that people were delivering digital files. So my dad had to go back to school to learn that, which meant that my mom worked 3 jobs and was sending my dad back to school, and then me being by myself. I think Americans are quite a bit different than Europeans, and especially the Dutch. I saw at the airport while I was waiting for my ride a child that was riding on his parents' rolling suitcase, and he's taking a running start and then jumped on it and then slid a good couple of 100 yards, it felt like, and then he face planted, and I laughed because I'm a horrible person. And then after I laughed, I looked at his parents to see what they were doing. They looked over and then continued having their conversation. And I just thought that was such a cool thing to observe. But anyway, I digress. Back to my story. My parents did not leave me home alone, because that's, I think, illegal in the United States to leave your 10-year-old home alone for more than a couple hours or at all. So I went to school with my dad, and on a gumdrop Mac, I learned things like QuarkXPress, Photoshop before layers, destructive Photoshop, for those of you who remember that, terrifying time. And I just gained these design skills, and I used them for such good. I built Backstreet Boys websites, and I once was the holder of an NSYNC web ring, and then I also sold Leonardo DiCaprio calendars to all my friends, because that's when Titanic came out. So I've always been entrepreneurial, so when I graduated, I took those skills back on, and basically emailed every single person I knew in my database and wrote them a custom email saying, how can I provide a service to you? Design of anything from a website with a CMS for single origin coffee roaster, to a poster for a belly dancer, to a press kit for a modern jazz musician. Any job. I took every single job that I could and have a really weird portfolio as a result. But in 2017, I had been working at an agency for about 5 years, and I had helped to grow the team from 2 designers, of which I was one, to a cross-disciplinary team of 26 designers, developers, content strategists, and writers. And I realized that I was working these 60 and 70-hour weeks, and for what purpose? I was helping big brands like Nike and Taco Bell to sell more shoes and tacos. I was helping Jeff Bezos to become richer. I don't think he needs my help. And so I decided instead to do what any rational person would, and I did a hard reset on my life. You're supposed to laugh then, come on, okay, thank you. So a hard reset on my life, and I packed everything up into storage, broke up with my boyfriend, quit my job, and then backpacked around Europe to remind myself how much better socialism is. After a few months of doing that, it got very cold, so I went home. But what I realized in doing that the reason why I was so burnt out making Jeff Bezos more money as his little Santa's elf is that I didn't have a purpose for what I was doing. And so that's when I realized that at my core, I'm also an activist. So when we look back through my career, journalism taught me to seek stories that are of small things like manhole covers from people that are often ignored. And being a designer taught me that the solutions that we seek are only as good as our framing of the problem. And activism taught me that unless we explicitly seek justice for all, we will only ever end up with justice for some. And if we concatenate this into a string, we have seeking solutions for justice. And that is what I do now. My name is Tatiana Mack. I use she and they pronouns, and I am here to speak to you about how privilege defines performance. When I give this talk, other places where they don't understand what performance is, and they think performance is performance art, and they expect me to do a dance, I reframe this talk as how privilege defines perspective. So before you get into my mentions and tell me about how there's not enough performance in here, I think that you've gotten a lot of performance today, so hopefully I can give you some perspective. So to appeal to this audience, I wrote to you all a plugin. And like most plugins, this is in beta release. We're still testing it on ourselves and on each other. And before you install anything, you have to agree to some terms and conditions, some GDPR. And the terms and conditions of this talk are quite simple. It's that I recognize that this talk is going to make many of you very uncomfortable. And that's okay. Comfort is how we grow, or discomfort is how we grow, rather. And I don't ask you to do anything with that discomfort. I just ask you to sit with it. So you don't need to make it go away. You don't need to change yourself. You don't need to do anything. I'm just asking you to sit with that discomfort. Because I guarantee you that that discomfort will be temporary. You'll go on with your lives. Maybe you'll be like, ugh, this chick gave this talk, whatever, and you'll move on with your lives. And that discomfort is something that you might have the privilege of having go away. Many of us in the audience, well, I shouldn't say many of us in the audience, some of us in the audience live with permanent discomfort. So with that said, when we think about privilege, I think there's some faces that we might think of. This is Regina George from Mean Girls, a movie that I reference a lot. Maybe we think of Jordan Belfort, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. If you'd like to buy a calendar, go ahead and send me a DM. Or Moira Rose from Schitt's Creek. If you haven't seen that show, hilarious. I don't know if it's available on Netflix in Europe, so hopefully it is. But privilege isn't just reserved for fiction. It's also very apparent in real people, like Keeping Up with the Kardashians' Kim. This is one of the many Trumpster fires that we have in my home country. And also our boy, Marky Mark, who likes to store passwords in plain text files. And also, I don't know if you can tell or not if that's a deep fake or real. I don't think he can either. So when we look at privilege, it's not so binary. It's not just, we often say that person's privileged. right, as if it's a binary thing. But really, when we look at the definition of privilege, it's a special right, advantage, or immunity granted to only a particular person or group. And when we look at privilege through the lens of the ways that we define people, I picked 8. I recognize these are not all the ways in which we define people. Thank you for the people who pointed that out to me. I picked 8 because it fits a 16:9 ratio well, so that's the reason. But the ways in which we define people commonly for UX personas, for example, are things like race, class, gender, religion, physical ability, orientation, nationality, and mental ability. And there are some default settings for this: to be white, wealthy, a cis male, Protestant, able-bodied, hetero, American, and neurotypical. Those are the default settings in tech in particular. And when I first gave this talk at Perf Matters, just in April, which that's so bizarre to me that it was not that long ago, I included the implicit association test. For those of you who don't know what that is, it was a test created by 2 Harvard professors about testing whether we have implicit bias. The way that they did this was that they set 2 binaries. When it's done digitally, it's 2 buttons, and you were to associate the buttons with white and good on one side, or black and bad on the other. And then things were rapidly sent your way. So a picture of a black person or a white person, a picture or concepts like love, okay, good, murder, bad. And what they were seeking to show is that when white and good are associated, people would answer them much more accurately and quickly. But when they were switched, and white was paired with bad and black was paired with good, people were slowed down. And great, so that helps to prove that we have an implicit bias. But then what? And the book that they wrote about it, called Blind Spot, with a severely ableist title, is what I quoted in my talk. And I realized after my friend and colleague Chanda Prescott-Weinstein told me that this is a bad setup. I shouldn't be setting up my talk this way, because yes, we all have implicit bias. We can't help it. We're creatures of nature. Like, biases help us to survive. Biases also distract from true anti-racist work, and they distract from the ability to fix bias, overt or not overt. Like, the harm that we do is what we need to focus on. We need to stop focusing on this idea of oh, well, are you biased, are you not? How do we fix bias? No, we need to do active anti-racist work. So all of this is a distraction. The article that's linked in this slide is excellent. It's very long and it is dense, but basically Chanda goes through and dissects why this argument is so flawed, why we need to stop focusing on bias. So going back to this grid, I didn't pick these at random. And what I want you to imagine is that this is not random. Okay, great. Good job, Tatiana. But instead, this is systematized. And what if I told you that the system behind this is the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy? Now, you might be wondering, okay, you're in America, racism is much more of a problem there than it is here. And I would proffer that on the global scale, with globalization is the way that it is, there is overt racism everywhere in the world. Places where it's white dominant are affected by racism. It might manifest itself in different ways, culturally, of course, but it exists everywhere. This term, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, comes from an excellent writer and really prolific human, Bell Hooks. She's a Black feminist author that I wish more people would read. The reason she came up with this term was that when she was interviewed about the harm that she's experienced, people would try to extricate whether it was because she was Black or because she was a woman. And what she told them was that all these systems of oppression, white supremacy, sexism, racism that stems from all of that, all those systems are intersectional. And that's what the term intersectional comes from. Kimberly Crenshaw coined that term, another Black feminist I wish more people would read. So when I gave you these default settings, the reason these are the default settings is because that's who holds the most power. In America, this is who colonized America and who raped and murdered many indigenous people so that they could found a new country. Those default settings are ingrained into our society. And so when we look at these settings, You might be thinking that a lot of those boxes are boxes that you yourself tick, and you might be feeling kind of defensive. That's natural. And you might be thinking, I'm not privileged. But I have a little secret for you. And that secret is that we all are, including me. So now we're ready to install our privilege plugin. There's only 39,431 dependencies. The first one being to confront your privilege. So I think to help take off a little attention in the room, I'll talk about my privilege. So when we look at these boxes, these are things that I squarely fit into. I'm relatively wealthy. I have like a $3,000 computer that only partially works and has a shitty keyboard. I'm able-bodied. I'm American, which I guess is a privilege. And I'm relatively neurotypical. And when we assemble those together, we have this list of terms, but we hate being labeled in such binary ways ourselves. And so let's add some nuance to this. I'm able-bodied, but I'm petite, which means that I'm at a distinct disadvantage when I play basketball with Tim, and I still kick his butt. I'm American, but I'm a first-generation Asian American, which means that anytime I get into a ride share, I have to have the conversation with the driver that's, where are you from? I'm from Portland. Okay, but where are you really from? Portland. I was born at that hospital right there that we're driving by. No, you know what I mean. Where are you really from? What flavor are you? That's my favorite. And while I'm wealthy, moderately so, I'm not Jeff Bezos wealthy, but I was raised poor. My parents immigrated to America, and they didn't have very much money when they did so, so they created all of the wealth for themselves and thus for me. And while I'm neurotypical, I also experience suicidal ideation and depression. And so these terms are somewhat restrictive, right? That we only fit into these boxes, but there's nuance to it. And not only that, but just because I'm not white or a cis male or hetero Protestant doesn't mean I don't benefit from those things. My proximity to whiteness, that I'm relatively light-skinned, I'm Asian American instead of, say, a Black American, I have a lot of relative privilege as a result. And while I'm not a cis male, I don't believe in the gender binary, I present in a way that is not antithetical to who I am. So when someone says, ma'am, sure, it annoys me, but it doesn't hurt me as badly as somebody who doesn't identify or doesn't present in a way that aligns with who they are. And while I'm not hetero or Protestant, I don't wear any sort of religious head covering, say, that immediately reveals to you what my religion might be. And here's a plot twist for you. Privilege alone is harmless. There's nothing wrong with privilege. We all have privileges. Privilege is kind of like a character from Mean Girls, I told you. It's like homework that people should do before they watch my talks. Is like Gretchen Wieners. And to give you a little context for Mean Girls, it is a movie written by Tina Fey, and it is about Lindsay Lohan's character, Katie. She moves to a new high school, and there's a group of girls, the Plastics. They're the most popular girls in school, and she's trying to just fit in and get by in high school. So Gretchen Wieners is kind of the ditziest character, and so she's a really good representation of privilege. But, and it's a big but, she has a friend, Regina George, who represents power. And that's the thing, is that privilege is what gains us our power. So when we look at this block here, what that represents, and what I didn't tell you, is that it's something that we stand on. So the block is something that we all have, but it's different for everyone. So here's like your average dude in tech, and there's me. He has more relative privilege, and he's on a higher block than I am. And what I didn't tell you about this grid earlier is that it's not so much a grid or just a grid, it's also a wall. And so when we have our privilege blocks, that's what gives us a leg up on this wall. The thing about privilege is that it doesn't dictate how hard we work or how far we go. You can be the most privileged person in the world, and you can still work supremely hard, and you can still have had a lot of grievances and a lot of pain in your life. I'm not trying to take that away. I'm just trying to say that privilege determines where we start. And the thing with privileges, we're standing on a block, we don't often look down at our feet to see what's under us. Our privileges are invisible to us until someone on stage is yelling at us about it for 45 minutes. And there's this diagram that I borrowed from the New Yorker, and it was done in that ugly New Yorker style, which was really not fitting my vibe, so I redrew it with Pac-Man. And what it says on here is that the dot says, the world is unjust. And then Pac-Man says, well, there is some justice. And then Pinky's like, what are you talking about? The world is just. We're going to analyze this a little. Here's the difference, is that the dot can't move, and Pac-Man and Pinky can. And that's the thing, is that the dot, what gets generated as the dot or as Pac-Man or as Pinky is random, just like us. It was by random selection that I was born in Portland as a first-generation Asian American. That's a randomized thing that I did not help, just like you didn't help where you were born. But the thing is, the system that grants us the power associated with our privilege is not random. And when we look at this diagram, we're looking towards the privilege, right? We see that privilege is heading in a specific direction. It's a vector. And most days we're not looking at that. Most days we're looking towards our oppression, the ways in which we are disadvantaged within life. And the reason for that is that we look for the ways in which the system benefited us, our privileges, we don't look towards, the ways in which the system benefits us through our privilege. Instead, we look towards the ways in which the system disadvantaged us. That's what we're doing most days. And the reason for that is capitalism. Capitalism wants to tell us, hey, scarcity is a thing. Capitalism scares us with scarcity. There's a reason for that, because the harder we work, the more money we make for the system. And so capitalism just tells us to work harder. Get over it. Get over whatever social justice shit you're talking about. Just work harder. I hear that a lot on social media. So I want to reframe this for you all in a way that might resonate if you're still not convinced, which is that Lyft earlier this year IPO'd at a cool $24.3 billion US dollars. And this guy, Logan Green, is now valuated at a also cool $760 million. And if I were on Tinder, before he IPO'd, he only had $360 million, so I totally would have swiped left on him, but now that he's $760 million, totally would swipe right on him. Just kidding. And the average Lyft driver, which by the way, I Googled average Lyft driver. This is what came up. I've never seen a Lyft driver like this, so let me know if you do. They make an average of, according to an MIT study, $3.30 per hour. And if we multiply that out times working 8-hour days at 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, so counting for no vacation, no benefits, no taxes removed, that's about $7,000 in a year. So if we look at this picture, I think we have to admit that we don't earn everything we receive. Logan Green didn't work 140,000 times harder than the average Lyft driver, or 80 to 90,000 times more than you or I. I just don't buy that. And that might make us kind of uncomfortable, especially if we have a bit more money. We might be mad right now, or you might be sad, or we might be feeling kind of awkward. And the reason for that is because we really like to peddle this idea of meritocracy. That's at the core of tech. And meritocracy is this idea that things like goods or power, wealth, they should be based just on pure talent, effort, achievement, rather than things like sexuality or gender or race, all the things in my block effectively. And here's the thing with meritocracy that not very many people know. Meritocracy came from a book written by Michael Young, and the book was about the London school system. So it was about the ways in which the London schooling system was failing. That book is a satire. So basically this homie wrote a book that was equivalent of an Onion article. I don't know if you've ever read the comments on the Onion's tweets when they tweet their articles. A lot of people think the Onion's real. And that's what happened with meritocracy, is that it's a satirical concept. He made up this concept about the London schooling system and wrote the satirical book, and then people took this idea of meritocracy, which is at the core of the book, seriously. And I remember reading something about Michael Young on his deathbed was like, fuck, that is my one regret. So I invite you here to this funeral, the death of meritocracy. When we kill something or when something dies, we might experience some grief, like denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. So let's walk through those. Denial might look like, I work hard for everything. Sure, I'm sure you do. Anger, slavery wasn't my fault. Bargaining, well, why not a men's month? Depression, I hate my privilege. To acceptance, where I hope we all land, which is that privilege isn't my fault, but it is my responsibility. And as the great James Baldwin, a tremendously fabulous writer that I wish also more people would read, nothing can be changed until it is faced. And that's what we're doing today. So we recognize that privilege and power play a key role, but that's not the complete picture. There's two other high schoolers, played by Lindsay Lohan on your left and Amanda Seyfried, and they represent bias and ignorance. And that's the thing, is that privilege is what gains us our power, but ignorance is what hides our bias. And so next step, still got 43,231 dependencies. God, we're not on airplane Wi-Fi like the last time I ran NPM. We need to admit our bias. So when we look at this is what our focus is, right? And how does that manifest? In tech, you might be asking, you've been talking about privilege, you've been quoting some people I've never heard of. What about tech? All right, here you go, my friends. This is the chart from the Majestic Million. For those of you who don't know, that is a study that was run earlier this year by the web standards WCAG, and they run studies on accessibility and oversee the standards. And these are the results of the 1 million most popular sites. The most common mistakes made for accessibility are things like low contrast, missing alt text, empty links, missing form labels, missing document language, and empty buttons. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and say that accessibility is easy, because it's not. But relatively speaking, these 6 errors that are the most common are very simple to fix compared to a lot of other accessibility woes. And these are things that can be fixed by a lot of people. Things like missing alt text, especially, are things that can be generated on the user side. So these are not things that are overtly technical, is my point. And the reason that that happens is the same reason why Domino's asked the Supreme Court to shut down a lawsuit that requiring their website to be accessible to vision-impaired people and people who use screen readers. And the reason is because we center the able-bodied and neurotypical experiences in our work. This is your average gender dropdown, and I imagine many of you work for companies that have a gender dropdown, and I hope you remember this. I fill out a lot of forms, and I noticed one day, after years of not noticing, that male is always listed first. I'm curious why. Is it the number of characters? Or is it because God made Adam first, and then he made Eve, so it's like a biblical nod? Is that why it is? And then I also looked at the Dutch census, and it's interesting, the Dutch census from 2011, the breakdown shows on the graph on the left is the average age of men in the Netherlands. That's graph 3.23, and then is followed by 3.24. And this is a pattern that is prolific. Men are listed first almost always, and it's very rare that we include gender options beyond the binary, such as non-binary. Usually it's just listed as other. And this also manifested itself in a tool in Framer. So this is a Framer. I was doing a design that had a lot of faces, and many of you can see, but I'll describe it for those who might not be able to see this. I was trying to figure out, when I did a whole array of faces, there was like 60 faces in front of me, they were all masculine presenting, like probably men staring back at me. And I was like, this is so weird. Like, I know that tech is really shitty at this stuff, and so this is a mistake that I'm not surprised by, but I was like, I wonder if there's any way I can change it. And then I opened up the settings, and I saw that the gender, when listed as true, was male, and when it was listed as false, it was female. So I learned that day that my gender is, in fact, false. And the reason for things like that are because we center the cis male experience. Now, this one. This is a video of the soap dispenser. I don't know if it'll play. It won't play. So It's the soap dispenser at Facebook offices, and you may have seen this. It dispenses soap to the light-skinned hand and does not to the dark-skinned hand. Oh, now it plays. There you go. Whoop, works, great. White people can be sanitary. Oh, and if you have a dark-skinned hand, you don't get to be sanitary. Okay. No, how do I get to the next slide? I'm stuck on a racist loop. Help. All right. And then my friend Jackie Alcine, which is one of the coolest names of all time, tweeted this a while back. Google Photos, y'all fucked up. My friend's not a gorilla. So this is the automated algorithm that Google thought would be really helpful to identify that things are skyscrapers, airplanes, bikes, cars. And oh, look, his friend is a gorilla. Self-driving cars are more likely to hit black pedestrians than white ones, as if we need more things to murder black people in this world. And this is my favorite one because it hits dear to my heart. So it's a camera that tries to tell you when someone blinked. Jaws Wang is not blinking. And then to things like when you Google like successful CEO, this is what comes up. And the reason for all of these things is because we center the white experience. You're starting to see a pattern. Now, within performance, when we're doing our testing, this is a screenshot from Firefox DevTools and Chrome DevTools. You'll notice that there are things listed like Galaxy iPhones, Microsoft Lumia, Nexus, Pixel iPhones, kind of the standard phones that are quite common, but not around the world. I was in Nairobi and Lagos earlier this year speaking at Concatenate, amazing conference, and most people around me had phones like Huawei's and Ones, and phones that you might have never heard of, Tecmo. Those are the phones that are most used in the world. If we look at the global population, like the phones that are used in India, for example, surpass by and large all the phones that we center in our testing. And all those phones, I should add, are what are considered low-end devices. So they're phones that are anywhere between $100 to $300. They're perfectly excellent smartphones. What we typically use and centered in those testing tools like iPhones and Pixels are thousands of dollars. Those are considered high-end devices. The reason for that is because we center the American experience. I know that's weird to be in the Netherlands and to say that we center the American experience, but you have to remember that Silicon Valley, the real place, not the TV show, is that is where the hub of so much happens. And so I see this being emulated even in places like Nigeria, where they really idolize the work that we're doing in America. And when we look at this, at some point, a designer or developer casted some sort of range, right? Like they decided what an appropriate skin tone was or what was sufficient contrast for their website. And they determined some sort of device money range. And they might have done that intentionally or unintentionally, but it doesn't matter because the impact is still the same. And they missed part of the picture, that the ranges that they cast were insufficient for the testing that they did. The reason for that is that we have a very narrow worldview. And in fact, I would say that we deny the subjectivity of our worldview. And we really like to hide behind math. And your girl's a math major. And I love this tweet by Ryan Saavedra. He says, socialist Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez claims that algorithms which are driven by math are racist. I would like Ryan Saavedra to take a look at the way in which we cast these ranges. So we might see things as being usable or unusable. We might set an appropriate range for things like my apartment door. I can't trigger the door of my apartment. I wish Tim could just walk around with me all the time. But it's set some sort of appropriate range for me to actually get to leave my apartment. Or in performance, we might determine what is an appropriate load time for somebody, but that's going to be different around the world, especially in places like Lagos, where people are relying on data instead of on Wi-Fi. And we might determine an appropriate range for someone to walk. Like, we might decide that a mile is close by, or 10 miles might be close by, depending on who we are. And then we abstract these terms sometimes to being more generalized words like hard and easy, tall and short, fast and slow, and near and far. And the problem with this is that these terms are centered in the neurotypical able-bodied and wealthy experiences. I wish that there was a book that Brian Saavedra and many of us in tech would read, actually 2 books, which are Algorithms of Oppression and Technically Wrong. These 2 books do an excellent job of showing how things like algorithms are extremely laden with our bias and with our centered perspectives. And that's the thing, is that we in tech have the privilege of defining what the viewport is. And what we include in the viewport is the grid I showed you. The default settings of that grid are what we center. I center those experiences even though I'm not squarely within them. And when we look at this graph, we need to remember that this is all relative, and we need to contextualize our absolutes with a relative. And to do that, we need to lessen our ignorance, still at 43,231 dependencies for anyone who's counting. So when we look at this graph, what we need to recognize is a term I really hate that you might hate as well, that you hear from clients say, which is that this is what's above the fold. Oh God, I hate it so much. But we need to be aware that we're always focused above the fold. We're focused on the viewport that defines our lives. And so in order to fix this, what we need to do is have a curiosity and to scroll past our own viewport. We need to consume things that do not center our experiences. A little story here is that, I don't know for those of you who have seen this movie, it's short by Pixar. It was the precursor to Incredibles 2. And Bao, I won't spoil it, but Bao is a movie about a mother and son who they make dumplings together. And I was watching this in the theater, and I was crying hysterically. I don't know if those of you have seen Up. That's probably the only other Pixar movie that also made me cry as much as this movie. But this movie was really the first time, I think I was in my late 20s, where I saw the depiction of something that resonated with my relationship with my own mother. 20-some years old. And then around me, mostly white folks, because that's what I have in Portland, they were laughing. And they were like, that was such a weird movie. Like, what was that even about? Like, they said, this is an ableist word that I hate, but they said it was stupid. And to hear other people experiencing something that just like emotionally struck at my core, and to hear them say that it was stupid was like a really, really, really sad moment for me. And I think that what I wish I had known to say to them at that moment is to understand that not everything is made for your understanding. I grew up for 29 years only seeing Disney princesses that didn't look like me. You got a blonde one, you got a redhead, you got like a brunette, and then it wasn't until Mulan, who's Chinese, like that didn't resonate with me, that I had a Disney princess. I don't know if that she's even classified as a princess, but a Disney princess that looked like me. And we throw around the term empathy a lot in this industry, especially within the design community. We talk about empathy all the time. Have empathy for your users. But I have a word for empathy. Empathy is a scam. I don't buy it. And the reason is because when we look at the definition of empathy, it is the capacity to understand or to feel what another person is experiencing from within their frame of reference. That is the capacity to place oneself in another's position. I don't think that someone in that movie theater watching that movie could understand fundamentally how I was feeling. I just don't think that's possible. And more importantly, whether or not it's possible, empathy seeks to validate someone else's lived experience by centering your own. You're basically saying, well, if I can feel that, then it's valid. But if I can't feel it, then it's not valid. So instead, let's replace empathy with trust. Trust people when they say that something is racist. Trust people when they say something is sexist. And trust your users' lived experiences over your own presumption. So if someone tells you that something feels fast or slow, trust that. And stop gaslighting people's lived experiences just because they're not your own. Because again, like we might not be able to understand how someone is feeling, but don't gaslight them for it. Don't tell them, well, that's not true. Are you sure about that? That's gaslighting. Stop it. I love this quote from Angela Davis. She says, if they come for me in the morning, they will come for you in the night. And I think that what is happening, I wrote earlier this year an article for A List Apart called Canary, I always say canary in a coal mine. And that's how I feel a lot of the time. That in tech, I'm screaming about these issues, and it's like what I've become known for, which I'm partially resentful for because I think I'm a decent designer and developer as well. But these issues plague me every single day, and they plague users and people that look like me. And the thing is, I am a canary in a coal mine because I'm saying it first. I'm telling you I can't breathe anymore. You're all the miners, and you might be able to hold a bit more oxygen, but at some point it's going to start impacting your lives. Case in point, global climate crisis. Indigenous people have been screaming about the global climate crisis forever, and we ignored them. We didn't listen to them, and now it's starting to impact people in wealthy countries. So what we have to do to fix this is to share our power, because nothing about us without us. That is a saying we say a lot in accessibility. And what we mean by that is that we need to include people in building these tools. So diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. What a lovely quote by Verna Myers, the VP of Inclusion at Netflix. But I'd borrow Verna's words and add to it that justice is letting someone else through the party. I don't know how many conferences I've been to where all I see staring back at me are white, wealthy, cis males who may or may not be Protestant, able-bodied hetero-Americans who are neurotypical. That's who's building the tools. I just ask for those people, get off the stage. You've had your time. So many of them are speaking at the same conferences year after year. Set it for someone else. Use your privilege to step aside and to tell a new narrative. Let someone have their bow. You've had your Cinderella. You've had your Snow White. You've had so many of your narratives centered. Let someone else tell a story for once. And hand over the keys and power of our tech tools and of our companies to disabled, trans, immigrant, Muslim, Black, Indigenous, non-binary people, and women of color. And in doing so, we need to help each other. We need to learn to lift as we climb. And you might be wondering, well, okay, but aren't you just setting up a new grid? If we center everything like the Black, poor, Muslim, queer, neurodiverse, non-American, disabled perspective, does that fix things? And the answer is no, it doesn't fix things. Letting them through the party, I mean, it would be a lot more fun party, first of all. But recentering these narratives isn't enough. And instead, what we need to do is we need to tear down the wall altogether. So I tell all the Chads, which is sorry, I'll go back to this slide. So I call a lot of white dudes in tech Chads, and then I realize that it's a perfect initialism, which is a Caucasian hetero-able dude. So you're welcome for that. And all you Chads might be staring back at me right now, wondering, like, how do I go ahead and tear down this wall? What we have to do is we have to commit to doing this in every single action. Look at your drop-down menus. Look at every action that you're taking and understand how it might be harming people. With everything we do, with every pull request, with every comment we make, with every gaslighting moment that we have, we're contributing to reinforcing these biases in the world. So I just ask for you all to just commit and to do so relentlessly. Thank you.
I really like the way that you're positioning or discussing this. All right, privilege is
look
sort
at
of
my
like
feet.
No, we gotta get it. Yeah, it's fair.
I look like a child.
That's why the basketball thing again kicks in. There.
Yeah.
But see, you've
Still
got
beat you.
yeah. I like the way that you're framing like the privilege thing as a spectrum, because I think that's just coming at it from obviously somebody who's at the one end of that spectrum. Like that's I think one of the hardest things to kind of come to terms with. Do you, and from the empathy perspective as well, I find that interesting as well because we're taught a lot, like and I've said it before, like you've got to empathize with your users. I'm constantly talking about testing on slower networks or devices or whatever for that sort of perspective. Is it that it's completely useless, or is it that there's an extreme limit to what empathy can provide?
Yeah, I think that we can not only replace empathy with trust, but we can replace empathy with compassion. I'm not saying, like, be a dick, but instead, I think that empathy, I just don't know what it really accomplishes. Like, what does empathy accomplish, in your opinion?
Oh boy, cute. All right, and I'm prepped for this. I think for me, like, what I would hope for it to accomplish is to be able to make some of those things a little bit more aware. Like, I guess that's where I was coming from with the question in terms of the limitations of empathy. Like, I would hope that I would see empathy as the goal of empathy to make it so that it opens my eyes to things that maybe I have not seen before. and makes it a little bit more apparent to me when something like that I am biased is, standing out to me, like that I'm doing something, those invisible biases you're talking about. But recognizing that, yes, no matter how much empathy I develop, I will never fully understand what it means to be in that different situation or to have that different perspective entirely.
Yeah, and I think what you just described is a really great trait, which I would instead reframe as curiosity. That what you're describing is that we need to be curious about things that we might not understand and we might not experience, and we need to have a curiosity that our knowledge is intrinsically limited. We've only lived so much time. And I think beyond that, when we address that curiosity by learning, that there's just some things we don't understand. Like, I do not understand what it's like to be a developer in Lagos who relies on using data, who is on a phone that can't load a website that's shipping it like, a gig of JavaScript. Like, I don't understand what that feels like. And what I've observed is that we have this, someone a while back tweeted something about like, oh my gosh, like, look at these Nigerian developers. I saw one carry these bags and there was like, his hands were worn and he was smiling. He was happy to carry it for kilometers at a time. And it's like, that is us projecting onto them what suffering looks like, or projecting, like a lot of the people, especially in the performance lens, like I focus on that fast and slow, because fast and slow is so relative.
Sure.
Like, sure, when I'm on airplane Wi-Fi and I'm sipping on my free drink and I'm like, oh, the internet's so slow, like poor people must be so sad about this. Like maybe that's me being empathetic, but like, then what?
Sure.
I only care about it because it affects me? I don't know, I'm not sold.
That makes sense. And this is not a question, but I want to give you a chance to
just it's more of a statement?
Yeah, it's more of a statement. I'm pulling out that one. I want to give you a chance to plug the self-defined thing, because that feels extremely relevant for this particular conversation.
Yeah, so I'm building a dictionary, which is no small task. And the reason I'm building a dictionary is because when I speak out about a lot of these issues online, you'll notice that I have like a fixation with definitions. I think I included like 4 definitions in my talk. People will quote me the dictionary definition of racism a lot. And the dictionary definition according to Merriam-Webster is something like racism is any sort of discrimination against any grouping of race. Well, that's ignoring like privilege and power and all these things that, again, like people of color have been saying for a long time. And I just don't think dictionaries evolve quickly enough to address things in the positive, like our ever-growing understanding of like gender fluidity and all the terms that come with that, our understanding of just the terms that define us. So the dictionary is called self-defined for that reason, is that I'm hoping to give a place for people to define these new terms that they're coming up with as we continue to evolve. And I want to build a few things. Future plans are to create an API so that you can plug this dictionary into any of your tools and to have access to all the definitions. I'd like to build a Twitter bot and a Slack bot. So in the same way something like Threader app works, where you can say, at Threader app, please unroll this thread for me, and it does that. And then they steal your content and sell ads on it. The dictionary, you could say, hey, at self-defined bot, define racism, and it would generate the bot. And what the intent of that is to lessen the amount of emotional labor placed on minoritized people in particular to do a lot of this education. Like, my job is like, sometimes it feels like my job, in addition to having a normal full like scope of work, is to educate people. And so I want to build something that can help take off that burden of education. And then lastly, the thing I'm most excited about is to be able to have, many of you might be familiar with the website pronoun.is. If you're not, you should look it up. But basically what it does is it helps to say pronoun.is/she, they. And it tells you what the pronouns are, and then it teaches you when you click on that link how to use the pronouns. I would like to do something similar where on the dictionary, it'll say something like self-defined.me/Asian American plus pan. And I can put that in my profile, and then someone can immediately understand. They might be like, well, what does it mean to be pansexual? They can click on that, and now they know what terms that I want to use for myself. Like in the disability community, a lot of folks might prefer to be called a person with disabilities, or they might prefer to be called disabled. That dictionary will help people to just do a lot less emotional labor so they can get back to their lives. I don't enjoy talking about this stuff. It's not fun for me. I sort of had fun when I was making fun of Tim, but like beyond that, like that's not 45 minutes of fun for me. That's 45 minutes of emotional labor and work, and I'm probably going to go crawl in the corner backstage into the fetal position and enjoy the conference from back there. So yeah, please look up my dictionary. I'm really excited about it, and it's open source, so if you have contributions, like someone contributed, they have obsessive compulsive disorder, and they were really sick of people using that term to mean anal retentive or particular. So really, I would love for more contributors, so if you can contribute your time or code or writing, I would really invite that and appreciate it.
And I know this is incredibly emotional journey and stuff like that, which is why I'm so very grateful that you're willing to do it. Really appreciate it. It was extremely powerful, extremely important, so thank you.
Thank you, Tim.